In the last video, we added the flex blades to the rear suspension, and in this one I'm going to add it to the front and do another test on how much articulation it's going to give. And I don't have my hot racing metal steering links yet, and because of that, the way this all lines up with my inverted shocks, at full compression they do tend to touch right at the corners. So what I'm going to do, the bottom of the shock and the link itself, what I'm going to do is a trick I do when I'm trying to get more articulation out of the normal suspension components, is I round out these edges. I don't know why they would put a right angle edge on a part that pivots anyway, but there's plenty of meat there, and I'm just going to round that off and round the bottom of this off a little bit on the edge, and that should give me, you know, a millimeter or two clearance, and that's all it will really need. After that, we're going to stand it up on the quarters and see what kind of a change it will give with just rear. Well, we started off with 27 quarters with the flex, then it went to 33 with just the rear flex blades, and I'm going to do another test, and I'm expecting it to go somewhere around 39 once we get front and back. But that's where I'm going to start, and we'll see what it actually turns out to be. Well, just some light chamfering on that edge, and the shock edge took care of that gap that I needed, and they no longer touch and bind, so I'm pretty happy about that. And I'm going to move on and do the other side just to clearance it as well. And I just use a Dremel tool, but you can use whatever you want. Actually, the other side doesn't even need it. It might actually, but yeah, it will need it. I'll go ahead and do it while I've got it apart. And the other thing I'm going to do, I don't know why they put these here, but if you take these little tow hook looking things off the front, just buzz those while you're at it, it will catch on rocks a lot less than it does right now. I don't know if you guys really like those or not. I just now noticed there's a tiny hole that goes to the side that makes it like a real tow hook, but that is not of any particular interest to me and only hangs up on rocks. So while I've got the Dremel out, those are going to go away. There's the other side put together. With the shocks inverted, the fake reservoir needs to be forward, and you can see there I have just a tiny gap. The nice thing about when things barely touch is you don't have to take much away to make them barely not touched. And the reason I keep these at all is I've filled them with tungsten putty, and it's worth about 3 extra grams on the front axle. And before I started all this, it was within 1 gram of being that perfect 60-40 weight distribution front to back. So I'm going to keep them, and eventually I'm going to add wheel weights to the front and back, and it will, by nature of making the car a little bit heavier, will transfer some of the weight towards the rear of the car. But if it's really close still, I think it's worth it, just because it'll be more stable when it's side hilling. Right now I don't have any weights inside of the wheels, and they do help. Next thing to do is get the tire back on and figure out how much articulation having the front blades has added. This time I had to actually raise the body off of the clips to provide enough clearance for these wheels to move. The wheel arches aren't tall enough right now. I'll have to open them up a little bit to provide the wheel clearance necessary for this amount of articulation. But I'm now going to count how many quarters this is, and I'll spread them out and get right back to you. By adding the front blades, I didn't get quite as much out of it as I would have thought, but it did add only 2 more. I mean, it went from 27 to 33, and now it's at 35 quarters of articulation. And I'm going to take it back to that same rock we looked at yesterday. I keep it around because it's kind of slick, and it's right on the edge of what these can do. And it went from a 1 to 10 success rate before I added the rear flex blades to about 1 out of 2, which is a pretty good increase. And I want to see now if I can just crawl over it without having to use momentum. Another note on this, I'm not going to cut the wheel arches on this body. I'm going to leave it kind of how it is for now. Just try to keep it somewhat nice. It's got a few scratches on it, but not bad. It'll probably eventually end up getting cut, but this is the chassis that's going to go underneath the mini rock bouncer that Mofo RC sent me. So there's really no point in cutting this body up, and when I'm just going to be taking it off anyway. Alright, looking at the front of the bumper, you can see I've removed the little tow hooks that were on there. All they do is catch on the rocks anyway, and they didn't do much. The holes in them were so tiny, it would be like threading a needle just to put something through there to begin with. And I don't know if you noticed how much easier that just went up the rock face. It slid up rather than catching, and I didn't have to gun it to kind of wheelie the thing up there. I'm finding out that I'm probably still going to need to use a little bit of momentum, because I've tried this a couple times off camera, and it still needs just a little momentum to get up there. But it does it no problem. I was hoping to just be able to do a slow crawl up there, but it didn't work out. So it'll still do it. I'm happy about that. I've got cars that can just crawl up. And part of that in this case of this vehicle is it doesn't have enough weight on the nose, and the torque from the rear axle will just flip it over backwards. You can see this has pretty decent side hill ability at this point. I don't know if it's capturing it well on the camera, but it's got a pretty good amount of lift, and it side hills very well, just because it doesn't have the extreme articulation of some of the other vehicles. And here you can see where the tire is getting up into my body, just because it's not been clearanced. If I was going to keep the deadbolt on indefinitely, I would certainly clearance it, because right now the travel of the wheel is being limited by the body. It can only go up until it hits it. But since I'm going with the mini rock bouncer chassis, wheel clearance won't even be an issue with that one. So we'll see if we can get it over this one. This is a good angle. Pretty decent side hill action on that one. We're looking at the bottom of the car, and I think I can pull it off, maybe not, but we'll see. Right on the edge there. See if I can make it come down. There we go. All right. The last thing I'll do is just run it across the top like we did in the previous videos, and show you that working as well. This is the last section of the trail for tonight, and just going to show the articulation route, what it can do now. Got it pointed a little bit too far to the left, but I'll make it happen. It has articulation, but it's not all bad when wheels hang, because that provides center of gravity as well. And that didn't hurt for any articulation. It didn't have any trouble going over there. To drop a wheel in farther might have just hung it up, because I don't want wheels dropping into holes and getting stuck. I want them to drop about a wheel width from the other tire, and then I want it to stop, because any lower than that and it won't carry the wheel over the hole. Sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's not good. In this case, I love this truck. It works out really well. Going back to this course, I ran my other deadbolt with kinetics in the rear and stock shocks up front, and it actually did better than the small tire car. Obviously the tires make a huge difference, but this is going to turn into a monster. I can't wait to put it on the bouncer chassis. I'll get rid of probably another 10 to 15 grams from the top, and once I get the wheels weighted, it's going to really do a nice job. Next video, like we said, will be more about the chassis upgrades, and I'll compare it to some other things too. But I really like how these are turning out so far. The Flexblades are good because they control the CG, and yet they give you more articulation than stock. And honestly, I didn't want a whole lot more than stock. I'll show you some climb angles that this thing can do later. It's pretty impressive, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out for such a basic build. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.